I love sweet God Magnet. Love just to tell you, don't you grab it.
The great nerd novel Ready Player One is looking to hit the big screen towards the end of March of this year. Ernest Cline's ode to video games and 1980s nostalgia has come full circle by being adapted into a big-budget tentpole film directed by Steven Spielberg, one of the main architects behind the cinematic era that Cline obsesses over with an almost fetishistic reverence in his novel. In the trailers, the movie is billed as the holy grail of pop culture, creating an incestuous Ouroboros cycle where creativity has stagnated so much that our pop culture is literally eating itself in order to produce anything new. While the book was generally successful, there's been a slowly developing form of cultural backlash against it amongst the more savvy and progressive segment of nerd culture. It has become a sort of favored whipping boy for people who read and write for sites like Polygon and Kotaku, who love to drag it out into the street and verbally flagellate it so they can feel superior.
Same for Ready Player One, premised solely on the idea that there is a meaningful reward in life for tying one's personal identity to the mindless consumption and regurgitation of pop culture artifacts. Also, it's bad. Fincher, Kubrick, Lucas, Spielberg, Del Toro, Tarantino, and of course, Kevin Smith. I studied Monty Python, and not just Holy Grail either. Everyone became calling them the Sixers. These days, most Gunters referred to them as the Sucksors, because they sucked.
Mostly, I think a lot of this is driven by spite and jealousy because they're angry that their high school fanfiction didn't become a New York Times bestseller or get picked to be adapted into a movie by Steven Spielberg. Personally, I think Ready Player One is fine. I don't think it's a masterpiece, but I do think it's fun and engaging for what it is. But I think that there's a movie that came out years before even the original book was published that did everything Ready Player One does, but better. And that movie is Summer Wars. If you've never heard of it, Summer Wars is a great anime movie directed by Mamoru Hosoda, a filmmaker that some have even gone as far as labeling the next Miyazaki. If you haven't seen Summer Wars, I'd recommend you pause this video and check it out right now. It is that good. It's the kind of movie that works as a wonderful piece of gateway media to introduce people to the larger world of anime. It's a great crowd pleaser that can appeal to anyone and everyone. So if you're not familiar with why I'm comparing the two, let me break it down. They both take place in a distant future where the entire world is run by a huge virtual world ecosystem. In Ready Player One, it's the OASIS, which is a virtual reality game world that has become so influential that the majority of the world economy and resources is now conducted digitally. It's a place where every major licensed property exists alongside each other, where Freddy Krueger can stand side by side with Chun-Li and Tracer from Overwatch. It's essentially World of Warcraft meets Second Life on steroids, creating a thriving virtual society that features every facet of pop culture ever created by mankind. Summer Wars features Oz, a social network on steroids that's basically like a virtual Facebook that's grown so big that most of the world's economy and a great deal of the electronic infrastructure now flows entirely through it, as well as many of the electronic systems and infrastructure are also controlled via Oz. Both pieces of media tackle the same idea of a new future and how it's affected by the advent of these huge internet-based global software platforms, but the two approaches couldn't be more different. This is where we get into one of my big problems with Ready Player One. The setting takes place in 2044, and it's a pretty dark dystopian vision of the future. Basically, the world is overpopulated and running out of resources. The main protagonist, Wade Watts, doesn't even go to school physically anymore because he fears he will be raped and murdered should he ever step foot out of his trailer park. Evil corporations control everything. The world is basically devolved to the point where the world looks like something out of RoboCop. That's the sort of problem. While Ready Player One's setting is very brutal, cold, and harsh, its narrative is light and fluffy. The basic premise is kind of like a video game version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where the reclusive creator of the Oasis and eternal 80s child, James Halliday, after his death reveals a message that he has hidden 3 Easter eggs in the Oasis. Whoever finds them inherits his entire fortune and control of the Oasis itself. Essentially, this creates a new culture of 80s-obsessed nerds who refer to themselves as egg hunters or gunters in internet slang, as they try to discover Easter eggs inspired by Halliday's obsessions. But the evil super corporation, IO, wants to take control of the Oasis for itself, and has a corporate army of avatars willing to use any dirty trick to ensure the heroic Gunters are stopped from keeping the Oasis open to everyone. So basically, the story boils down to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory with an epic climax of a World of Warcraft raid where Ultraman battles Mechagodzilla to ensure the safety of net neutrality. This is pretty light and fluffy stuff, and nothing is particularly well served by the ridiculously dark and depressing setting. It comes up briefly midway where Wade imagines what he'd do with all that money, and his suggestion is simply to build a spaceship, load it up with all the video games and movies from the 80s, and run away from Earth before it eventually implodes. That's where I start to take issue with the book. I have no problem with a light, fun adventure that's soaked with nerd culture and references, but it's set amongst a bleak future that isn't quite self-aware enough to criticize how its own slathering devotion to blind consumption has created a society that lauds the greedy materialistic consumption of 80s culture in a world that is literally dying due to mankind's greedy materialistic consumption of everything else. But hey, let's forget about the fact that the world is on fire when we have the Goonies and Gremlins and Lady Hawk! And spoiler alert for anyone who cares, at the end of the book where Wade finally wins the day and gets the final Easter egg, he's given a switch that can completely destroy and turn off the OASIS forever. But he never touches it and learns nothing of value except, isn't being a lover of video games and 80s crap the best thing in the world? I'm perfectly fine with a dumb, shallow, materialistic message, but Ernest Cline thinks he's a bit more smart and clever than he actually is. I think this passage from the book sums it up best. I wish someone had just told me the truth right up front, as soon as I was old enough to understand it. I wish someone had just said, here's the deal, Wade. You're something called a human being that's a really smart kind of animal. Like every other animal on this planet, we're descended from a single-cell organism that lived millions of years ago. The story you heard about how we were all created by some super powerful dude named God who lives up in the sky? Total bullshit! The whole God thing is actually an ancient fairy tale that people have been telling one another for thousands of years. We made it all up, like Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. And oh, by the way, there's no Santa Claus or Easter Bunny. Also bullshit. Sorry, kid, deal with it. But that's where the bad news comes in. To be honest, the future doesn't look too bright. You were born in a pretty crappy time in history, and it looks like things are only going to get worse from here on out. Human civilization is in decline. Some people even say it's collapsing. I hate this passage. I hate it so much. It is incredibly condescending and perfectly encapsulates the entitled, obnoxious attitude of edgy internet know-it-alls you see all the time on Reddit. But I digress. Ultimately, I enjoyed Ready Player One, and I just wish Mr. Cline had gotten off his preachy high horse and realized that his magnum opus features a pivotal scene where a kid plays joust against an undead lich, and maybe he shouldn't be taking himself so seriously or trying to jam in any hand-fisted messages into his pulpy piece of cotton candy popcorn entertainment. You might love Speilberg, but you're not a Speilberg-level storyteller. Seriously, your second goddamn novel is just a ripoff of The Last Starfighter. That's why I think Summer Wars is an infinitely better piece of work. It does not exist in some dystopian environment. It's a world much like our own, except the Oz social network is a bit more advanced and not too far removed from the functionality we see in things like Facebook or even Second Life when it was at its peak. But it is not a world that is dying or a world where people blindly ignore their problems to simply consume the opiate of a virtual one. What makes Summer Wars work so well are its two intertwining narratives. In the real world, Kenji's a math student who works as a moderator for Oz during the summer vacation, until he's invited by school cutie Natsuki to come along with her and participate in her great-grandmother's 90th birthday celebration. To his surprise, he's brought there to pose as her fiancé. Over the course of this little vacation, Kenji gets to meet the extended Junichi family that is gathered for a giant reunion to celebrate Sakai's birthday. The second storyline features the world of Oz becoming infected by a malevolent computer virus that begins to start wreaking havoc in the real world as it takes over public utilities and causes chaos. Eventually, the two stories intersect when we learn that the virus was created by Wabisuke Junichi, the black sheep of the family, who was the bastard love child of Sakei's deceased husband. Despite this, Sakei still took him in and raised him as part of her family, despite the rest of the family always looking down on him. Eventually, the fate of the world comes into the hands of the Junichi clan, who along with the help of Kenji and Wabisuke join forces to defeat Love Machine before it can melt down a nuclear reactor. The key difference between Ready Player One and Summer Wars is the fact that Summer Wars emphasizes the importance of human connection. As cool and memorizing as the world of Oz might be, the interlocking history of the Junichi family is just as fascinating, seeing how they can trace their lineage all the way back to feudal Japan. It's their human history and sense of legacy that makes them strong, and nowhere is this better displayed than one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie. Blood Machine is causing chaos throughout Japan, wrecking public utilities, and Grandma Sakei goes to fight it all on her own. And she doesn't do it with laser beams or kung fu skills or some incredible coding prowess. The way she maintains order is simply by sitting down with a rotary phone and calling people. As the montage plays out, she reaches out to public service workers and politicians. We see the vast collage of photos behind her. This is a culmination of 90 years of experience as her human connections come together to battle an inhuman foe. That's what makes this scene so awesome. Technology is amazing, and we can make our lives better than ever before through it. But it is ultimately a tool that is designed to facilitate one purpose, and that's to maintain those human connections. And that is what makes Summer Wars a much more powerful and emotionally resonant experience than Ready Player One. In Ready Player One, there is a human connection, but it only exists because of a shallow obsession over dumb nostalgia and pop culture references. In Summer Wars, something that's as important and crucial as the digital world of Oz, because Oz isn't an escape from the world, but rather a means of facilitating and maintaining the bonds that are so important in our lives. And it's this sort of message that makes it a better piece of work. Don't get me wrong, Summer Wars is as much of a crowd-pleasing piece of popcorn entertainment as Ready Player One. But what makes it better is that it has a beating human heart at its core. While the only value I really see in Ready Player One is a desire to go buy Funko Pop figurines and indulge in memberberry-fueled blast of never-ending nostalgia.
Oh, and remember Bionic Man? Remember Chewbacca again? Oh, I love to remember Chewbacca.
The film adaptation of Ready Player One hasn't been released yet, so as far as I know, maybe Steven Spielberg managed to improve upon the source material and make it something better. I can't imagine a filmmaker of his caliber would waste his time and $200 million to suck his own proverbial dick for 2 hours, so maybe the movie will be better. or you can go check out the real-world version of the OASIS in VR chat.
Nowhere. Except the OASIS.
Stop!
Why are you running?
Queen, stop! Where are you going, Queen?
Why are you running?
She needs energy. We must give her energy. We must sing the national anthem to her to give her energy.
On the ground.
What do you mean?
On the ground.
Dude, if my father walked in on this, I would have some serious explaining to do.
Daddy,
Don't call me daddy.
do you love me?
No.
Do you love me?
No.
It's time to get frisky with Kremit. Come here. Come here, baby. Oh, hey. I was kidding. Holy shit. I am going to commit suicide now.
Yeah, that VR is sure coming a long way. We're living in the future. I'd recommend you check out Summer Wars, and then you can tell me what you thought was better in the comments below. Again, thank you for your time in watching this, and remember, lobsters and tennis, but don't you grab it.
Magazine liar.